Well, hello again. We're going to talk about Sudan, and Sudan is full of so many conflicts. Not just Darfur, the battlegrounds, east, west, north, south, everywhere. It's a real civil war. And what to talk about regarding to this mess, this ongoing mess? Well, the United Kingdom's export licensing policy is not working really, because we export arms on a massive scale to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and to Egypt and to the United Arab Emirates, all of whom are of course fueling this war, along with Qatar, which has become a player now. All the British arms on the ground in this brutal civil war, and we don't even really restrict arms exports to Israel. We expect us to restrict arms exports to the UAE or Saudi Arabia under a Labour government? No. Arms exports are less restricted under the present British Labour government than they are under the previous Conservative government. And actually, the United States is no question restrictions really. So where are we? But it's what it is, isn't it? It's what it is. It's the world we live in today. The United Nations lacks the vigour to deal with Sudan. The United Nations is a busted flush. It's really lost its role. The United Nations Special Envoy are completely useless, mouthing platitudes, doing nothing, weeping crocodile tears. The United Nations is irrelevant in this context. Where is the diplomacy if the UN lacks the vigour to deal with Sudan? What civilian protection plan has backing from the international actors? Well, there's a question for you. Nothing really. Of course, we don't need the international community to have a kind of agreement on humanitarian access that we can possibly manage without the help of the international community, because why? Because you're seeing, the best soup kitchens and so on are locally Sudanese done. The women in various towns and villages are arranging little ceasefires, like from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m, with the women arranging them with the warring parties, with the Rapid Support Forces and the Sudan Armed Forces, the two great militia powers that are tearing the heart out of Sudan. The women are arranging little local ceasefires. The only people who are doing anything really, doing little local ceasefires in order to go to the market and so on. But the war rages outside those hours. And the media, international media, is full of propaganda. All of them. Propaganda. The RSF and the UAE, the Rapid Support Forces and the United Arab Emirates are blamed quite rightly for being bad. But the Sudan Armed Forces, they won't speak about ceasefires or peace process. They are the real core of the problem. And by the way, the Sudanese Armed Forces browbeat the civilians in the diaspora. So in the Netherlands, in Britain, the Sudanese Armed Forces people bully, harass ordinary women who are activists for peace in Britain, in the Netherlands, in Europe. They do this. So they're really troublesome. The Sudanese Armed Forces are also committing horrible atrocities inside Sudan, just like the Rapid Support Forces. These are two militia forces, neither of which are legitimate governments. And I want to come at the end of this, so hang in there, to a solution for you, to what I believe is a solution. I mean, why won't the Sudanese Armed Forces sit in peace talks? They won't. You understand, the Rapid Support Forces are supported by the United Arab Emirates. The Sudanese Armed Forces are supported by Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Qatar. And, yeah, the Sudanese Armed Forces are vicious, just like the Rapid Support Forces are vicious. The Sudanese Armed Forces use chemical weapons. Meanwhile, in places like Darfur, that's in West Sudan, Darfur, there's a lot of kidnapping for ransom. Not so much, actually, curiously, by the Sudanese Armed Forces or the Rapid Support Forces, but by other militia groups. Other militia groups are kidnapping for ransom. Terrible, really. Terrible. Both the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces are war criminals. Okay, you get this? In this civil war. And what do we do in Britain? We just continue issuing statements supporting the Sudanese Armed Forces, our clients, and opposing the Rapid Support Forces. Oh, come on, they're both awful. Yes, it would be good to interrupt the flow of arms if one could. I mean, Qatar is supplying arms. Qatar has just joined this war. So you have Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates pouring in weapons. Pouring them in. As if the country didn't have enough already. It's awash with arms and ammunition. Lot of it British. Yes, you heard me. And the rest are Chinese, of course. The Sudanese Armed Forces will not listen, will not attend peace talks. You can't have peace without an end to war. African tribes involved as well. Malawi, working with the Sudanese Armed Forces. It's such a mess. There are calls for the Rapid Support Forces to be described as a terrorist organization. Well then, call Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates terrorist states. What are you doing? What are you doing? It's not. Go to the source. This is in many ways, in many respects, a proxy war. I guess civilian protection is possible without a ceasefire. I guess it is. You could argue that the war in Darfur itself has already ended because the Rapid Support Forces have taken Darfur now with the fall of Al-Fasher. With the fall of Al-Fasher. I always get the name of that place wrong. Why is that? I don't know. So why don't the Sudanese Armed Forces have the political will to go for a ceasefire? Perhaps we underestimate the power of the ordinary people. Ordinary people can make a difference. You can make a difference by lobbying your member of parliament or your congressman or your whatever representative, depending on where you are. And women, Sudanese women, are a very powerful voice. Remember that they led the uprising against Bashir. Oh yes, the women did. Against the former president, but unfortunately then the civilian government came in and then the Sudanese Armed Forces, and led by Burhan, and the Rapid Support Forces took over and chucked out the civilian government. Chemical weapons being used by the Sudanese Armed Forces, they've been used in Omdurman and in Darfur. Not good. Yeah, and as I say, the women have negotiated ceasefires to go to the market, so that's hopeful, General Burhan is not in charge of the Sudanese Armed Forces. That's a mistake a lot of people make, because the Sudanese Armed Forces are like a kind of regime in the old-fashioned description of the word regime. So you remember forms of governance, and a regime is a number of generals or kind of cabal, a group, as in Burma, for instance, is a regime. Then you have dictatorships, then you have democracies, then you have kingdoms. You know the different forms of government. I know journalists use the word regime for everything they hate now. So it's a Russian regime, or if you're an Iranian, you say Israeli regime. It's used as a swear word. And Western journalists are the worst in this regard. But in its traditional sense, General Burhan heads a regime, but he's a figurehead, which is why it's very difficult, because you have to deal with these Islamist Muslim Brotherhood generals who keep him in power and pull the strings of the puppet. So it is difficult to get the Sudanese Armed Forces to get to the table. I noticed the Sudanese Armed Forces' use of chemical weapons has not reached the corridors of the United Nations. No objection there. The fall of al-Fasher gives the Sudanese Armed Forces incentive to use chlorine gas. North Khartoum, just to clean out the Rapid Support Forces. They've been using too much chemical weapons. I don't know where they're getting it from. They're making it themselves. I don't know. But the women in places like Kadugli, they are negotiating little local ceasefires, which is good. Somebody told me, an old friend of mine told me, that compulsion doesn't tempt people to put down the gun. Difficult to force General Burhan and his people to come to the peace talks. Of course, you're aware that the Rapid Support Forces have offered to come to peace talks publicly, but the Sudan Armed Forces are refusing. Compulsion doesn't force people to put down the gun. There has to be incentive to do that. One of the problems with international actors like the United States and Britain does nothing, by the way, and has a historic responsibility as a former colonial power. One of the problems with the United States and Britain is there are very few people left that know Sudan. Very few diplomats. You have to look to the old guard and perhaps bring them back to negotiate and help foster a peace. Now, by the way, there is a thing called the Quod, a group of 4 nations: Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the USA, who have put themselves together as peace brokers. They're doing nothing, of course, but interesting, aren't they? They are the powers that are fueling the war. Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, and so on. They're the powers that are fueling the war, and they're the peace brokers. You'd think they were ideally placed to make peace, wouldn't you? They could force their clients to come to the table, but they won't. Saudi Arabia won't put pressure on the Sudan Armed Forces. We could put pressure on Saudi Arabia. It's interesting too, the USA is involved, backing the Sudan Armed Forces. The USA is involved because of Saudi Arabia. You know how much money there is for President Trump in the Saudi deals through his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and so on. I mean, in this instance, it's the tail that wags the dog. Saudi money counts a lot. To America, well, it counts a lot to Donald Trump. it counts a lot. Bankrolling his family. So you have a situation where really Saudi Arabia is the power that could be asked to change things. America's not going to do it. UAE has done as much as it'll do. Qatar has just entered the stage. Egypt won't do anything. Saudi Arabia could stop this war. Could. Now, what would I like to see? What would be the best solution to the Sudan conflict? Well, I'll give it to you now. The ideal outcome, in my view, and a lot of Sudanese are not going to agree with me here, but I think we have to have an end to this. You know, women are being raped, people are being murdered on a massive scale. Rape is a weapon of war in Sudan. People are starving, people are being shot, people are living in fear, and people are emigrating, crossing the Mediterranean and coming all through Europe and all the way to the United Kingdom. There's a stream of migrants. Understandably, isn't it? So we have to have an end to this war. And the outcome I favour is a peace deal whereby the government are given Khartoum, the government, I say the government, Sudan Armed Forces, are given Khartoum, Port Sudan, and the corridor in between, and Wad Madani, the agricultural area just to the south of Khartoum, and the corridor in between that. And that sort of triangle of land, oblong, I suppose, of land, that chunk of land should be given to the government. And then the remaining interior areas should be given to the rapid support forces, is what I think. And I think that would be an outcome that would be satisfactory to all, and then both should foster a civilian government. We should have elections. We should have a temporary civilian government that's appointed, but in the longer term we should have elections in Sudan. Well, in the short term, actually, we shouldn't mess around. Elections within... Let's not mess around. Put a fast time frame in. People, you know what they used to do in Iraq? They used to ink the fingers of the people who voted so they couldn't vote twice. Just call fast elections. Have the elections right away, within a couple of months, for a civilian government. And within that government, the standing agreement should be that the Minister of Interior is appointed by the Rapid Support Forces, and the Minister of Security is supported by the Sudan Armed Forces and appointed by. So these two ministers will control, well, not control, but will be the spokespersons in the government for the two militia groups, which will then be controlling those areas and be responsible for that. And then the civilian government is responsible for everything else but internal security, policing, and so on. So policing and the warriors in the interior are rapid support forces, and policing and the warriors in the center, the Sudan Armed Forces. And you have a civilian government to deal with everything else: education, transport, foreign policy, every bloody thing else, and end it that way. There's no other way, really, is there? These two, I call them two warlords. I don't know, that's stretching a point with Burhan, but Hemeti and Burhan, Hemeti with the rapid support force, Burhan, they're not going to give up power. So but what they want is their hand on security. So give them that and make them be responsible. I think what I've just suggested is a way forward. In the absence of anything else, and in the absence of the political will on the part of Britain and America to take an interest in Sudan. So there's a solution for you, in my view. What do you think? You got a better idea? I doubt it. God bless you and keep you. And thank you for listening.